Did you hear the hilarious joke about a maximum wage? When Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison mentioned a maximum wage during a meeting with the Congressional Progressive Caucus in 2018, one reporter assumed he must have been making a joke. Who ever heard of such a thing? When asked about his joke, Ellison fired back that he was not joking at all. Ellison described the income disparity between McDonald's workers trying to get $15 an hour and the CEO who makes approximately $9,000 an hour. If we say your incalculable greed is not acceptable, we get called communists. Why not call CEOs what they are, which is avaricious and greedy? There seems to be little recognition that it is disgustingly greedy for the US ultra-rich to take so much when millions of Americans don't make nearly enough. For example, returning to the minimum wage for contrast, one 2018 study showed that even working full-time at the US minimum wage, no worker would be able to afford rent in an average-priced one-bedroom home in any state in the Union. According to researchers, a minimum wage worker would need to work 99 hours per week for all 52 weeks of the year, or approximately 2.5 full-time jobs, to afford a one-bedroom home at the national average fair market rent. It is the poverty of the minimum wage workers that makes the inflated compensation of US CEOs possible. It would take a typical McDonald's employee more than 3,000 years to earn what the CEO got paid just in 2017. But still, the idea of a maximum wage is so absurd it must be a joke. It turns out that the idea of a maximum wage hasn't always been such a hilarious notion. In fact, the US almost got a maximum wage during World War II. On April 27, 1942, President Roosevelt asked the Congress to institute a maximum wage because of the war effort. He said no American citizen ought to have a net income after he's paid his taxes of more than $25,000 a year, the equivalent of about $486,000 in 2023. The way it would have worked is that a 100% war super tax would have taxed away all income above a certain threshold. The official proposal landed on $40,000 for individuals and $110,000 for married couples. It turns out that even during World War II, this idea was a bridge too far, yet by war's end, top income tax rates had climbed to 94%. After a slight post-war dip, top income tax rates for the rich stayed above 90% through the Republican Eisenhower administration and didn't drop until rich man President John F. Kennedy cut them to 77%. Today's top income tax rates for the rich max out at 37%. As author Sam Pizzigati points out, if it's possible for us to understand the concept of a wage floor, a minimum amount of compensation for people to survive on, why not a ceiling? The thing is, this hilarious concept of a maximum wage, or even tax rates above 90%, as was once broadly accepted, or 70%, would be really good for the American economy. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look at what happened when the US had those very high tax rates on the rich. It was that period of time that conservatives love to idealize. A single wage earner, a new car every couple of years, broad-based prosperity. It was called the golden age of capitalism, the post-war period encompassing the 1950s to the 1970s. It was also a period of huge tax rates on the rich and the highest percentage of union membership in our nation's history. There was a rationale for high tax rates on the rich back then. Matthew Iglesias points out that having 90% tax rates meant that companies had to pay executives $1,000 for every $100 in increased pay. Rather than send $900 to the tax man, there was greater incentive to spread that money around with smaller raises for less extravagantly paid workers. Giving more money to more people rather than the rich stimulated the economy. This is a big part of the reason that growth rates and productivity rose with wages during that period. But the policies that made those things possible were abandoned a long time ago. Ronald Reagan and his predecessor, Jimmy Carter, blew up redistributive policies that had been around since the New Deal by slashing taxes on the rich, a trend that continues all the way to today. The idea behind the first Reagan tax cuts was that they were supposed to stimulate growth. Instead of stimulating growth, however, cutting taxes on the rich has only choked growth off to even lower levels than the US economy had before Reagan was elected. Tax cuts for the rich have made things worse. Bribing the rich has failed to increase growth for 40 years. Yet both the major parties that make up the US political class stubbornly refuse to do anything different. Instead, in truly insane fashion, they continue to cut taxes on the rich in the supposed hope that doing the same thing, which also happens to be the politically expedient thing, will somehow achieve a different result. It never will. Here's what you need to know. Inequality is a political choice. There is no law of nature that that says CEOs and executives need to make 400 times what the rest of their workforce makes. There is no principle in economics that says the wealthiest handful at the top should hold more wealth than the poorest half of all Americans. America's vast economic inequality has been brought to us purposefully through decades of choices and changes in American law. We live in the world that rich people want because they have bought and paid for it. But it's even more important for you to know that what has been done can also be undone. Since inequality is not a law of nature, it can be reversed. We don't have to accept the status quo. I don't think a maximum wage is a hilarious joke. Taxing the rich is good for our economy. It makes sense. There's a reason that we used to do it aggressively in this country. We should do it again. Please like, follow, favorite, comment, and subscribe to my free Substack. Let's make these rich motherfuckers pay.